Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit here about all the television stories and all this stuff that happened as a result of the changes that have happened here to college football. Now, as you know, I'm filming a lot of this stuff a couple of weeks in advance, and so as a result, this is probably going to sort of feel like yesterday's news for you. I apologize for that. But as I was reading about, the decline of the Pac-12 and all the big changes that have come over college football, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly is going to happen in the long run, not just to football, but to Major League Baseball. There's a lot of stuff you can read about this, a lot of interesting takes from a lot of different sports writers, a lot of people in the mainstream media, a lot of people on Twitter. But honestly, when it comes to the college football discussion, I found that, at least in my mind, the most sane takes were all over on the CFB forum, the College Football Board on Reddit, also known as the Internet's tailgate. There are a couple of things that I read on there that are a little bit concerning to me, but I think the biggest is this idea that the Pac-12 would never have really survived on Apple TV because of the creation of the paywall. And the paywall is the thing that I really want to talk about here, right? So I haven't really spent the time that I should getting really deep into this, right? I talked about this on the blog a couple weeks ago, a week or two ago is when you'll be able to read this stuff, about sort of, the problem that underlies televised sports, and every sport has the same problem, right? Which is that if you put the sport on television, like the in-park, the in-stadium experience is going to have to offer something that television doesn't to make sure that people keep attending, right? So in baseball, and baseball is the easiest way to follow this, in the late 40s and early 50s, when television started to spread and started to improve and got better camera angles and was a lot more watchable, one of the problems that the major league teams had was that the television product was actually in some cases superior to going to the stadium to watch. Now, part of the problem is not just because, people could go over to like the corner pub, or it could go over to the sandwich shop and watch the game. And there were advertisements in the newspapers for this sort of thing. I mean, I've got to tell you that stuff did happen, and it was very obvious back then. Not only was that a problem, but the real problem that came up is that the stadiums were not being very well kept and very well maintained. This is one of the things that our nostalgic eyes tend to miss over, right? We think so much about how great like Ebbets Field was. We kind of ignore the fact that Ebbets Field was in a really poor state of repair in the early 1950s and mid-1950s. That's the reason why you had things like World Series games in which there were still empty seats, and things like that. The neighborhood was kind of going downhill, so much for the friendly neighborhood feeling. Maybe if you go back to the 30s and 40s, you see more of that. In the mid-50s, not so much. And the stadium was kind of falling into disrepair. This, I think, is most obvious when you look at the Polo Grounds. Now, they did throw a new coat of paint on it and did a whole bunch of other stuff like that, for the Mets when they came around. But they didn't fix a lot of the real underlying issues, which is why they moved to Shea Stadium instead of just fixing up the old ballpark and, doing well with it. And I mean, the more the less convenient it is to go to the baseball game, the more that people have to go through like really sketchy neighborhoods and have to put themselves in some sort of danger to go to the park, the less likely they're going to be to show up, right? That's one of the problems that you have. And that's one of the problems that baseball had back in that era. That's one of the reasons why television was treated the way that it was, and why a lot of the people running these teams thought, hey, we need to make sure we get this problem under control. I mean, your choice was either fix up the stadium and spend money to do that, or make it so that the television product is extremely limited so that people will be forced to go to the stadium if they want to see the team play, right? This not only happened in the United States, but this sort of thing happened abroad. This happened in Europe. This happened especially in England. I won't get too much into this because I don't want to bore you guys to death, but in England, the thing that finally happened in 1989 was, police mismanagement at the famous Hillsborough Stadium, for the site of the FA Cup semifinal match between Liverpool and whoever Liverpool was playing that day. It completely skips my mind right now. But at any rate, the match was canceled because of the crush that came in, because of the people sort of crushing into the pens. It's kind of a bizarre thing for us to think about, especially those of us who know what going to sports in the United States is like today. But back then, if you were going to go watch, football in England, soccer in England, for the most part, you weren't going to get a reserved seat. You were going to go stand over in the stands with the other people in what were like literally stands. Like you would stand there and you would be fenced in like you were a bunch of barn animals in a pen. That is the way it was designed. And you'd have sort of a certain amount of crush of people. The reason why the accident happened is because they tried to crush too many people into the small space. There were fences set up so that people couldn't easily jump over onto the field. And as a result, there was just not enough space and people were crushed to death, right? Absolutely awful, awful thing to happen, right? And the response to this and the result of it was the Taylor Report, which among other things recommended that all stadiums be upgraded and converted to all-seater stadiums in England, right? The teams there ran into the same problems that teams in the United States had run into in the 1950s and so forth, where the team felt that it didn't have the budget to really improve the stadium and instead started trying to get the city to pay for a new one. And if you won't pay for it, then we go over to Los Angeles or to San Francisco or whatever, right? In England, it's not quite the same thing. And in this case, it was more like the state was ordering the team to build a new stadium. But it has resulted in the over-commercialization of the sport. Happened at the very same time that certain elements within football, British football, were trying to make it look more like the NFL. That hasn't fully happened, but it's happened to a certain extent, right? So, I mean, the point about this is that, like, trying to get teams to make improvements to the fan experience in the park is a difficult thing to do. And it's not just a problem that baseball ran into in the late 40s. Ironically, when you look really deep into the history of British football, you'll realize that there was like no live televising of football league matches until 1983, which is insane. But that was also done in part to try to protect lower league teams and try to make sure that local fans would go see the game instead of staying home to watch much better teams on television. Real interesting type of thinking that was going on then, and that you also saw a little bit of in Major League Baseball, but not quite to the same extent. Now, the worry that I have, though, about this today, now that things are they're not really completely different. The worry that I have is that television is no longer thought of as potentially an advertising medium for these teams, which is what it really is. You have to understand, and a lot of people I think get this wrong, that like the purpose of live television in part is to entertain, but is really to sell product. Right? The way that this has worked from the very beginning is that, yes, you can put the show on and it gets a large audience and a lot of people watch it. But the point of it is to sell product, to sell advertisement to these people. That is how you get the money to pay for it, right? And shows that are very successful will end up getting more money in advertiser dollars, creating the incentive to make a show that is more successful. There's a problem with that, though, and the problem came along with the establishment of cable television, where networks could, in theory and also in practice, charge people money so that without even caring if they watch the channel or not. Now, that's the problem that you're running into with a lot of cable television services, especially with this regional sport networks service that we have all around the country that covers baseball games, right? There's no incentive to make the product actually watchable and no incentive to get higher amounts of people watching the game. And the reason why is because the money comes into the network from cable television subscriptions. Now, I don't know what it's like where you live. Where I live over here, it's common to see apartments and it's common to see like HOAs that will have special arrangements where like part of the HOA fee is actually the cable television fee and every house gets basic cable, which means ESPN will take a share and over here it's Masson. So Masson will take its share, Masson 1. And if you want Masson 2, then you have to upgrade to the next package, pay some extra money and so on, right? That's a problem because it doesn't matter if I watch ESPN or if I don't, or if I don't even have a television, I'm still paying them. Right? They still make money off of me, even if I don't watch it, even if I don't tune in, even if I don't do anything, right? That is an issue because what you're seeing in this country is more and more people voting with their wallets, trying to get away from that, especially since things like streaming and piracy are so much easier now than they were in the past. You can watch the same stuff without paying anything, and most people, I think, would prefer to pay absolutely nothing to watch it, right? But the problem is that the networks may not be able to make the same amount of money. They can't make the same amount of money they could before. That money's not going to go to, the Pac-12 conference, or it's not going to go to like the Dodgers or to the Yankees or to the Giants or to whatever. That's going to start a ripple effect that's really going to hurt things. Is there a way around this? Is there a way out of this? I'm not 100% sure. But the interesting thing about this is that this is actually the exact same problem that baseball ran into way, way back in the early days of television, right? Which is the old problem of, okay, well, we want to use this medium to advertise the team and to increase attention that's being paid to the team, But as we use this medium to advertise the team, there is this very, very real existential threat that exists. And that threat is that people will not want to come pay money to us to watch the product. And instead, they will freeload, right? It works to an extent because you can charge advertisers money if there are people watching the game, right? It also works quite well if they have to pay money to the package, and then the network gets money, and then the network will pay more money to the team, right? And then it doesn't matter if the team's good or the team's bad. The Pirates are always going to make however much. It was Root Sports for a while. I don't know who's covering Pirates games now, but they're always going to make a certain amount of money, from the television deal, no matter what, right? Like, that's the problem. The problem is that the teams do not feel market pressures whatsoever. That's what you can thank Bud Selig for in part, but it's not just baseball that has this. Every sport has this, right? Anyway, we can go on and on. I can ramble about this for a while. I was reading this thing, this is about a year ago again on, I think it was on Reddit or some other message board where someone was saying, hey, why start the Super Bowl at whatever time? Why not start it instead of starting at like 7 Eastern time? Why not start it at like 5? Or I can't remember what it was. It was something like that, Wouldn't you get a bigger viewership? No, you wouldn't. It doesn't matter. People will schedule their life around the big game because the Super Bowl is such a large game, right? You could schedule it at midnight and people would stay up to watch it, right? And in reality, like even when it comes to that game, the size of the audience does not really matter because it's kind of like a one-time thing, and the network can kind of set the amount of money that it will charge for advertising, right? It's not exactly, going to be at the whim of the free market when it comes to advertising dollars. And that's sort of the thing that runs the television world these days. Now, that is true, but imagine how much more true that is if you're ESPN and you're making $9 from every single person that subscribes to cable television in the United States, right? Now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you're always going to have this huge, subscription going. I mean, it's like $9 a month, right? According to that New York Times article. So again, I mean, like, when we look at this and we look at the economics of it, so many of us get really caught up in what is the television rating like, but that doesn't really matter. It doesn't. What matters is how is the television company making money, right? There are always going to be advertisers who are going to want to sponsor like, whatever, I don't know, the Seattle Mariners or whatever, right? You're always going to have some type of sponsorship, right? And you're always going to have somebody somewhere is going to want to watch the sport, right? But there are problems, right? All sorts of other problems that come up, like couching this stuff behind a paywall. That's a huge issue, right? Because, I mean, if I'm not a hardcore fan of like the Cardinals or the Rockies or whatever, I'm not going to pay, all this money just so I can watch their games, right? And what else am I paying for on TV, right? If I got to pay an extra like $30 a month to watch the games, I mean, there's nothing but crap on TV. Everything else I can watch, I can get somewhere else, right? I can go get, I don't know, Netflix or Hulu or whatever, pay less money and watch the same stupid shows, right? There's no reason for me to get this other than the live sporting event, right? And I mean, you got to be a real hardcore fan to start putting out that type of cash. That's the reason why the Pac-12 fell apart, right? Because if I'm not like the biggest Pac-12 fan in the world and I'm not willing to pay like $100 a year to have Pac-12 channel all the time, I'm not even going to touch it, right? Yeah, maybe I'll miss the like Oregon-Washington game, which I won't miss now because it's on, the big, they're part of the Big Ten now. But yeah, maybe I missed the one game. But it doesn't really matter. And if I really want to watch it, I'll go find a bootleg stream somewhere the way that everybody else does it, right? That's the problem that they're really facing. Anyway, I don't have a lot of answers for you here. I'm just saying that there's a lot of problems with this model and that I wouldn't be really surprised if, I don't know, like 20 years from now, if we looked at the landscape of baseball and it started to look less like a major sport and more like sort of how boxing or horse racing looks today. I'm just warning you guys, like, it's not going to get much better, and I'm not seeing a lot of changes in the sport that are happening that are getting people more interested. Instead, what I'm seeing is a lot more sort of hardening and pushing towards extremes. This is one of the reasons why I don't like WAR, and I don't like a lot of sabermetrics, not because the math is bad, but because it represents a push towards sort of extreme thinking in terms of fanhood that is very, very uninviting to people who are like casual fans or who are interested in it because of the storyline or something like that. That's a problem. It's a big problem. It's a problem that we're dealing with right now, and it's a problem that's not going to go away anytime in the future. And at some point in time, this sport is really, really going to become like yesterday's news and is not going to be relevant anymore. Anyway, on that happy note, I will end this here, and I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Let me know what you think. Bye-bye.